Today, we talk about the gift of your fertility and the beauty of God's plan for marriage and family life with Angela Hobbs on Spirit Inspire, starting right now.
Broadcasting from the Cathedral of the Assumption in Louisville, Kentucky, this is Spirit Inspire. And now, here is your host.
Welcome back to another episode of Spirit Inspire. I'm your host for today, Vincent Ricketts, and joined with me is my co-host, John Soul.
Hi, Vincent. Nice to be back.
It is nice to be back. I think this is our first recording of the year.
Yes, it is. It is.
That's awesome.
With the new mic stands. It's kind of cool.
Yeah, beep them. Well, you can't see them yet, but you will see them. They're
Right.
pretty cool. Anyways, today on the show, we have a special guest, Angela Hobbs. Angela is a wife and mother of 7, registered nurse, and a Marquette Method-certified professional. We'll get into more of what that means, but Angela, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Vincent.
So, we have a lot to talk about as far as your professional expertise, and really excited to get into talking about natural family planning. But of course, like the most important thing about a person, rather than their professional credentials, is their heart, and that's actually something we love getting into on the show. So, with that, you tell us a little bit about yourself, your family background, faith background, and then how does that inform kind of what you do professionally?
Yes, thank you. So I am the daughter of Jordy and Jean Liebert. I was born here in Louisville and raised. Went to Catholic schools all my life and graduated from Bellarmine University. My faith journey definitely began at home. I credit my mom and my dad with establishing a very solid faith foundation for me and my sisters. And so, they planted the seeds, and, that's continued to grow as I've matured through the years and had different life experiences. I met my husband at Bellarmine, Jamie Hobbs, and we've been married 25 years this June and have been blessed with 7 beautiful children here on earth. And then we have 3 little saints in heaven. So, it's really neat looking back over my life at this point and seeing how God has worked, through both joys and challenges that we've faced, and just brought me closer to Him along that journey. But I always, as an instructor, I always say, my primary job or vocation is being wife and mother. And then, I'm a Marquette instructor in my spare time.
That's awesome. So, for those in the audience who don't know, what does that mean?
What is the Marquette
That you're a
Method?
Marquette instructor.
Okay. So the Marquette Method is a method of natural family planning that was founded about 25 years ago at Marquette University. Dr. Richard Faring is the creator of the Marquette Method. They're the only university still with the Institute of Natural Family Planning on their campus. And they're very dedicated to helping couples live out their life, living out the call to responsible parenthood. But they also are very dedicated to having a method that's very scientifically based and is going to be effective. Both, I like to tell couples that I work with, they want to provide you with a method that is effective, and it's 98% effective, as well as user-friendly, because there are challenges that come with practicing natural family planning. So they're, still researching today new technologies that are coming to the market, because they always want to provide couples with something that will help them achieve their family planning goals or what they feel like they're being called to as far as their family. Yeah.
So, and if you had to explain natural family planning to somebody that never heard of it, which I think it's growing in popularity. Maybe you can speak to that too. But if you have to explain it, what's a simple way that you would do that?
All right. So very basic definition of natural family planning that I give in a class is that it's the ability of a couple to monitor the signs of their fertility And then once they have an understanding of their fertility, then they can make decisions. It's important. An important piece of that is discerning what they feel like they're being called to as far as their family at that time. Are they called to be open to another child, or are there circumstances in their life or in their family that makes it such that it wouldn't be a wise time to add on to their family? And so after making that decision together, hopefully prayerfully, then they use the method and the signs of their fertility to either achieve or avoid a pregnancy.
It seems so critically important today for young men and women to understand and embrace, because it seems like we live in a society that doesn't quite understand that value and can take life and love and marriage and sexual intimacy for granted as if it's just a given instead of a privilege, right? Can you speak to that a little bit of what that means for men and women to understand?
Yes. So I think it's a process. I think it's a journey for a couple to come to a really deep understanding of that gift. I think often it might be a requirement for a couple to take a natural family planning class prior to marriage. A priest or a diocese may require that. And so at that point, it may just be more of a scientific knowledge of, what is my body showing me and how do we avoid a pregnancy? And I think as a couple, if a couple is open to the Holy Spirit moving in their life and their relationship, they come to grow in virtue. It does definitely challenge couples to grow in virtue and self-mastery, in learning to think of the good of the other, whether that's their spouse or if they have children with special needs or circumstances where maybe it would be best for them to be able to fully devote their time to that child. And so I think it's God's way of working on a couple's heart till they come to the understanding that, that they're, I like to use the phrase, their fertility is a gift, right? It's a gift from God. It's not a guarantee. None of us are guaranteed that we get to have X number of children. And so it's just a journey and a process to grow in understanding and appreciate all that it can do to enrich a relationship.
Could you describe your journey, perhaps?
Sure.
Of what that is? Because you had to have had this journey to be this committed to it, right?
Yes. I think my experience has been very unique. I came from a household where my parents were very upfront. I think I mentioned I'm one of 4 girls. Maybe I didn't earlier on. And I can remember as a teenager them telling us, the only acceptable method of planning your family is through natural family planning. So I think that's very unusual for a couple or for a young girl to hear that. And then I attended St. Barnabas grade school. And when I was in 8th grade, my 8th grade teacher was a Billings instructor. And Billings is another method of natural family planning. And during a portion of the year where they were teaching us about human sexuality, they divided the boys and the girls up. And the boys got to spend time with our priest. And the girls spent time with her. And she introduced to the young women, the signs of fertility that our bodies show us over the course of a cycle. So from the time I was 13 or 14, I started to become aware of, what is my body telling me each cycle that I have. And then I, ended up pursuing nursing. I guess medical was something that interested me. And so when my husband and I got married, we just discussed and said, this is the way we want to pursue family planning in our relationship. And I think at first for us, it was more the medical, this is a way of maybe even controlling when we have children. But he was, right after we got married, he went to pharmacy school. And so I was working at the University of Kentucky while he was in school. And our plan was, we would probably maybe try to have our first child about the end of his pharmacy school. So that's a 4-year program. So we went into it with the mentality we'd wait about 3 or so years to have any children. But God had other plans, and we had our first daughter, Isabel, at the end of his second year of pharmacy school. So we were married only about 14 or 15 months. And it's not because natural family planning doesn't work. I mean, I think we knew that there was a possibility, but I think it was more God working in our lives. And I like to look back at that and think he knew that we needed her in our relationship and as a part of our family when she showed up. And so over many more pregnancies, and natural family planning can be challenging if you don't understand the reason why the church asks us to use natural family planning. And for the longest time, I don't know that we really had that understanding. I'm a rule follower, so it's like, well, this is what the church tells us we need to do, so this is how we should plan our family. And my husband didn't quite have necessarily that perspective at times, and found it frustrating, which would lead to challenges between the two of us. But it was probably 12 years ago or so that he heard that a speaker was coming to Lexington, and that speaker was Christopher West. And whatever the advertisement was that caught his attention, we had this newborn baby. It was our fifth, Marin. She was a baby, and he knew it would be hard on me for him to drive to Lexington to see a speaker, in the middle of the work week. But I fully supported him. And I think that was the beginning of a change in this area of our relationship. That's just continued to grow and for us to see, although challenging at times, to practice it out, to practice natural family planning, because there is sacrifice involved in it. I think we now see, why we're asked to live out our marriage in this way. We have Dominican sisters at our parish, and I'll give a shout out to Sister Augusta. She likes to say that marriage is like two rocks hitting against each other, smoothing out the edges.
Yep.
And I think that's a beautiful description of not only marriage, but natural family planning in a relationship, that it's helping to smooth out our rough edges so that we can become saints.
That's awesome. And thank you for speaking to the, just your personal kind of journey with that in general, but also to the challenges. I think so often, I don't know why we do this in the Catholic world, but there's so many things that we tend to speak of, and we talk about how great they are, but we don't talk about the challenges, the sacrifices that one has to make. And then it feels like if you talk about the challenges, then that makes you a bad Catholic or a bad person or something. But that's a real thing. What would you say to a couple that, they want to practice natural family planning, and that's a goal, right? And especially for faith reasons, they want to be faithful to the teachings of the church, but they're having those struggles. What words of encouragement would you have for them?
Good open communication with one another is so important. I try to speak with all the couples that I work with about, having a good. Don't let natural family planning become a wedge between you and your relationship, because you are two different people. The way we approach all aspects of our relationships is going to be different, just man versus woman, or how your upbringing, right? The things that you were exposed to. So you need to be willing to talk and be open to one another, to try to understand where the other, you might not be able to fully understand, but do your best to understand their perspective, and to work through the challenges together would be a very important part of it. Also, to turn to God in prayer, right? To take it to prayer. I think that has been, a big part of our journey with natural family planning is just letting God come into all aspects of our relationship and to change our hearts. I have a very legalistic approach to things, like this is just what you do, and not always as empathetic as I could have been, at different times in our relationship. So yeah, just trying to understand each other and walk that journey together.
That taking it to prayer being so key too, and not just like God make this easier, right? But I don't know. There's the suffering that comes with sacrifices, and somehow like trusting that the Lord allows that to sanctify us. And I've found since being married that like that communication piece with my spouse has been so critical, right? So that's good stuff. I wanted to ask John if you would.
Okay.
Well, so when we think about natural family planning, most people who are vaguely familiar with it, which I suppose is a good chunk of Catholics, tend to think of it in the preventative sense only. But I mean, John, I know that y'all struggled with infertility for years.
Yes.
And now finally you have a beautiful daughter.
Thank you. 5 months old. I know.
And so, can you speak to natural family planning from your experience on that end, as far as like the helping you all to have the child?
Yeah,
that you
sure. So we went to a class with I think it was Katie Paris, is that right? And that was Creighton, the Creighton model, right? That she kind of teaches, and that kind of began our beginnings of understanding the mechanics and technical information about it, because you get the philosophy and theology and what the church says and why it's valuable in practical reasons, but the technical aspect is where I think you experience the most challenges, because you're like, how do we even do this? Like, this is frustrating just because it's hard to do and requires discipline of tracking and thinking and waiting and communicating. And that's where you grow in virtue, right? So it's that nitty gritty stuff that we were learning. And because we weren't trying to prevent, but actually get pregnant, it became more of a, well, this is very, very difficult on a level that feels like it's not working. It's not doing anything. So we actually moved away from the methodology and more into the medical needs. So we actually went up to Indianapolis to Magnificat Family Medicine and pursued NAPRO technology, which is all about the medication. And I mean, we were taking probably 10 or 15 pills a day each. Maybe more. I can't even remember. It was crazy. But they said it takes between 6 months and a year, after many other tests that I won't get into, because there's also an intimate, private nature to a lot of these things that they have you do.
Definitely.
And in some doctor offices, even in Louisville, I felt more like a specimen than a human being, because there wasn't that Catholic holistic understanding of the human person. And I felt more like I was treated like a biological entity, that they were trying to manipulate and manufacture a child. And this is where doctors, even Catholic doctors, are pushing IVF, in vitro fertilization. And I was like, I'm just not interested in creating a whole bunch of babies in a petri dish and putting as many into my wife as possible. I hope one makes it. And to me, that feels more like taking the creative hands into my own. And that's not God. I'm not God. And so we felt very uncomfortable with that and tried to be very firm in communicating with these doctors. We don't even want to talk, stop bringing it up. And I even had one doctor push back and say, well, I've worked with all kinds of Catholics. They've done it. And it's like, and he was a Catholic doctor. It's like, okay, I don't ever want to talk to you again. Are you serious? But going up to Indianapolis, it was amazing how much different it was. We walked in and there was a scale, when, pregnant women are getting weighed. And above the scale in an office here in Louisville, it was just, here's a poster about you should get on birth control. It's your life, your future, your body kind of propaganda. There, it simply said, this scale does not measure your worth. And that to me was like, what a profound difference of worldviews that was for me. And sure enough, about a year into the whole process, we conceived, and that was part of the journey. There were other spiritual, miraculous experiences of healing that we had to go through as well. Crystal prayed a 9-month novena for impossible causes, and like a week after, we also conceived. So it's like God's timing was profound. But I share all that kind of funnily enough to segue to ask you about that element of the journey for people, like not just for those who are trying to prevent pregnancy, which is important, because those who are trying to prevent will learn virtue through this process too. But how do we help couples, at least specifically even in Louisville, find resources to get pregnant if they're struggling with fertility? Because it was a 4.5 year journey for us, which I know it's longer for some and shorter for others, but it's not easy no matter how much time you go through it.
No, definitely. That's a very challenging struggle to have to face, because I think the desire for children is so deep for so many of us. So I think the beauty of natural family planning methods I'd like to look at it as more, it's becoming knowledgeable about your own fertility, right? So even single women, should begin learning about their body and the signs that their body is giving them, because there are so many different types of medical issues that if they're addressed when a woman is younger, it may help her and her husband down the road as far as potentially avoiding challenges conceiving. But my encouragement to couples, if they are struggling with fertility, is to potentially pursue a natural family planning method so that they can learn more about their body. And then that will enable them to provide medical doctors somewhere down the line, if they still haven't conceived, with information. And the different methods help you to learn different things. The Marquette Method uses hormonal monitors that help us to monitor the female hormones of estrogen and progesterone and luteinizing hormone that can give doctors valuable information as well. So I think natural family planning is much more than just preventative. I think its purpose is to look at the whole person and the relationship and between the couple and help them on their journey towards parenthood, for sure.
Yeah, because one of the problems is I see in posters in places that aren't Catholic or aren't even focused on the whole person, and they lump NFP into another method of contraception among many, and they usually put it as like the least effective. Like, what is going on there when we're saying it's more effective than all these other methods, and it's also not about a method to prevent, but it's a method of love, right? Like, what is the difference of why are they putting it in such a least effective way, and why do we have such a different perspective?
Right. I think that some of those statistics come from very early forms of natural family planning, and I don't even know if you call it natural family planning. So the original form to help couples, or the original method, was called the rhythm method, was just a very basic assumption that every woman has a 28-day long cycle, and that she's most fertile around the middle of that cycle. So days, 13, 14, 15 is when she's most likely to conceive. And so it would just recommend certain days of abstaining based off this general idea that this is when she's going to be fertile. And so, if you look back, my mom's one of 11. My husband's mom's one of 12. We're from these big Catholic families. And so people would look at that and say, well, this rhythm method doesn't work, right? You have these huge Catholic families. And I believe it was, after Humanae Vitae, the encyclical by Pope St. Paul VI, encouraged medical professionals to, research and find methods that would help couples in, this journey towards responsible parenthood. That's part of what he called us to in Humanae Vitae, was to responsible parenthood. And you started to see different medical professionals pursue this. The Billings, it was a doctors, I don't know their names. It was a husband and wife, the Billings. They were in Australia, and who developed the Billings method were one of the first methods, I think, out there that's more scientific based, research based. And so I think these statistics are antiquated. I believe 3 to 5 years ago, the World Health Organization finally came out with recognition that natural family planning methods can be up to 98% effective. And I simply know that because Dr. Richard Faring at Marquette, they were very excited that they were finally receiving the recognition that these very science-based methods that are tailored to each woman, and her unique signs of fertility, are effective when they're done correctly and taught by, couples have support to help them walk that journey.
Yeah. That's actually, I'm not going to go down that road. But I think that we've kind of danced around it, and we've even kind of touched on it briefly. But your what is your business? What do you call it, a business? I don't know what to call it.
I like to call it a ministry.
Ministry.
But it's a small business, I guess. Yeah.
A gift of your fertility. And specifically, I kind of want to hone in on that word gift. But what do you mean when you say gift of your fertility? Yeah, I'll just leave it at that. What do you mean by that?
Well, I look at children as a gift, and I think my perspective or my view of that has grown over time. I think our society tells us that we should be able to have what we want when we want it, and so if children aren't in your plans right now, then you shouldn't have to make room for them. So all the different hormonal and artificial contraceptions that are out there give us that false idea that we're in control and that we can, plan our life the way we want to plan our life. But in our personal story, I mentioned that we have 3 children in heaven. So we had 3 children fairly easily, in my 20s. And then I conceived our 4th son, Gabriel, and lost him at about 16 weeks of pregnancy. And that kind of did rock our world, to lose a child like that. And without really a whole lot of explanation other than it was, a miscarriage early in the second trimester, which is a little unusual, but not unheard of, right? And so I can remember just in that grieving process, looking around at it seems like I'd noticed families with 4 children everywhere we went. We had the 3. It's like everywhere I went, we were by a family with 4 children, and, just the pain and the anger that was there. And, I think I was grasping, like, this should be mine too. Why can't I have that? So then, we quickly conceived again when we were ready to, and conceived a little girl, and I lost her at 19 weeks. And I think this was a big turning point in our faith journey. I look at that. So 6 months apart, we lost 2 babies. And, it kind of created a downward spiral, but it also catapulted us on that faith journey. We both started praying the rosary daily. I never was angry at God. I just couldn't understand, why is this happening? We never stopped going to church or turned our backs on God. I think we embraced our faith.
That's miraculous by itself right there.
Yeah. And so I think that's where I started to look at, I'm not in control, right? I can have this ideal in my head that we'll have a child every couple years because, that's if we want, right? That we never said that we're going to have X number of children, right? I always said we'll take them one at a time, just kind of see what life brings us. And obviously God was helping us to see that, I'm not in control. My husband's not in control. So on that journey, we eventually, thankfully, found out that I did have a condition that most likely was causing the miscarriages. I had a condition, or I have a condition called factor V Leiden, and so that could be treated while pregnant by taking Lovenox injections. So at least we had hope. You know, it was very challenging when we didn't understand what was causing this, and very scary. Like, can we keep putting ourselves out here with the possibility of losing, you know, baby after baby? And the idea of natural family planning was also very scary. It's like, because I had the false idea, you know, that I was in control, and that natural family planning just left the door more open than other means of contraception to conceiving. So thankfully, God blessed us again, and we conceived our child, Samuel, who's 14 now. But, you know, I saw God's hand at work, and looking back, I see how God worked through our lives at that point. And started to shift our viewpoint on our, you know, these children are all very much a gift. And so I think that's probably what led me to the gift of your fertility. I don't, my hope is that people don't view their fertility as this inconvenience. And something to try to be controlled. And I think that's what our world tells us, right?
Well, there's some level of turning our bodies into machines, like social media and all the technological advances we've made, connected to the sexual revolution that happened 50 years ago or so. It makes, I think, that's just really bad timing with all the rebellion as well as all the advancement. It just combined this mentality that my body is a machine to manipulate as well. It's nothing more than just a part of the technological progress we're manufacturing to create the society we want. And that can, I think, create a lot of hopelessness and despair in people's hearts, you know.
Well, and it definitely flows out of that, the body soul rupture.
Yeah.
Right. Like, because if I'm my soul, my body's a meat robot, you know, then I've effectively ruptured body and soul, which, as we know, is death.
Yeah.
So,
and that's something we're conducting interviews for young women right now to teach in the schools. We're creating God willing, a 5th through 12th grade program with the work we do with Family Renewal Project, and that's piloting right now. It's a very exciting time, so we're actively developing a lot of content, and that means we're increasing our bandwidth and interviewing different women to also help us teach, specifically on the days when we split the guys and the girls and break open those very topics. And there's just this deep insight that came in one of our interviews of this contraceptive mentality is the rupture of body and soul. Like, when you enter into that, you're basically entering in with this mindset that it's okay to split my body and soul in my mind. Like, I can do something with my body even though my mind, my heart, and my soul are not in conformity with that at all. You know, there's something off, and there's discord here, and society teaches us that's okay. Like, how do we heal that mentality? How do we speak to someone who, like, there could be someone who listens to this today, tomorrow, 6 months from now, that is completely living a contraceptive lifestyle and doing these things and they think it's totally fine, and they stumble on this somehow by the grace of God. What do they need to hear that could soften their heart to reach them in a way that maybe they won't see coming, even as I'm saying these words right now?
Right. I can look at that two different ways, both from the medical perspective and the spiritual. You know, medically, I guess my medical perspective is very heavily influenced also by my faith.
as it should be.
Yeah, our good and gracious God, our Creator, He doesn't make mistakes, right? And so when He designed our bodies to work in certain ways, he had a purpose and a design for them. And our world sells us the lie that, you know, like, a woman's cycle is not important unless she wants to have a baby. So just take a pill every day and take this perfectly healthy, functioning system and make it stop doing what it's meant to do. And I think that that lie impacts women definitely more than we realize. We maybe subconsciously, like a woman just thinks that there's something wrong with me, that I need to pop this pill so that I can fulfill whatever the world is telling me I should be doing. And it's so sad to me because the medical implications, I think, is it can lead to fertility issues down the line when a woman comes off hormonal birth control. Not always, but some women have fertility issues when they come off hormonal birth control. Are you all familiar with Dr. Janet Smith?
Yes, yes.
And she has a talk called Contraception Why Not, which is fascinating. I recommend that anyone out there listen to it.
Yeah.
But
Is that on YouTube?
I think you can download it. I believe she has a website that you can download the talk for free, or sometimes you see like a free CD of it, like at the back of
You see.
churches.
If Patrick, if you think you could find that, we could stick that in the notes.
Yeah, a
that'd
link
be
to
cool.
it because it is fascinating.
It is fascinating just how it can, by being on hormonal contraception, it can even impact the people we're attracted to. Like the man I'm attracted to if I'm on hormonal contraception might be very different than the man I would be attracted to if I was not, which then impacts our relationships, our marriages. So medically speaking, I see very little good with hormonal contraception. Simply because why do you take something that's healthy and make it stop working as it should?
Right.
And I feel like that's something that ought to be obvious. You know what I'm saying? Like, what is the purpose of medicine? The purpose of medicine is to restore the body to its normal, healthy functioning.
Exactly.
But what does hormonal contraception do? It takes the normal, healthy, functioning human body and makes it not function as it ought.
Or healthy in any way. Right.
And as a result, there are all those health consequences. And just again, medically, naturally, that's not even speaking relationally or spiritually or otherwise. And again, I feel like that should be obvious, but there's that underlying cultural mentality. It's from the milieu that we all swim in. I mean, what is that? Why do we do that to ourselves?
That's a good question. I do not know. And one thing for sure is I'm so very thankful that when we were engaged, my husband getting ready to go to pharmacy school, even though neither of us really had a deep theological understanding of why the church asks couples not to use artificial contraception, he was very much against me ever taking any kind of hormonal birth control. So when I suggested, my parents have always said we should use natural family planning, he was very agreeable to that because for some reason he just did not feel like, this was even before he went to pharmacy school, he did not feel like that was something that he wanted me as his wife doing to my body. And I'm so very thankful for that because, as sinful people, when things get hard, it can be easy if he was like, oh, it'll make life easier if you just, take a pill every day. I was never pressured in any way by him in that regard. And I'm so very thankful for that. And now with the knowledge that we have of my factor V Leiden diagnosis, if I take hormones, it could make me more prone to developing blood clots. And so it's like, oh my goodness, what could have happened, right? Because one of the risks of hormonal contraception is increased risk of blood clots. And if you have that medical condition on top of that, then it puts you at greater risk. So,
and I think that's fairly common, at least anecdotally. I don't have any data on that, but like I have a friend who was diagnosed with endometriosis a couple of years ago, and she was very thankful that her parents, didn't push birth control on her, that, solid Catholic family. And so that wasn't a possibility for her. Unfortunately, for many young girls, it is just kind of pushed on them as kind of a cure-all for whatever ailment they might have, from, bad cramps to acne. And and of course she had to go through all the procedures to, fix the endometriosis. But like, she was like, if I were on birth control, I would have no idea.
Right.
Right. And that could, end up in a much worse place than otherwise.
Yeah, it suppresses all of your symptoms, so you think you're healthy, when in truth
Exactly.
it all comes back later if you ever get off birth control, or even if you don't, it could
Right.
potentially cause major problems.
And unfortunately, this is what's taught, I think, in our medical schools. I'm working with a couple who are in medical school, and they're eager to learn. I sometimes think I don't know as much as I should, but they're eager to learn what I have to tell them, because in medical school it's not taught. They're taught to treat so many women's issues with hormonal birth control. There are organizations out there that are trying to change that. There's an organization called FACTS, and I can't tell you off the top of my head what that stands for, but they are trying to recruit medical professionals, natural family planning instructors who are willing to go into medical schools to teach this to our doctors in training, right? Because
Patrick, can you put that in the show notes as well?
FACTS?
yes, because it's not being taught. And I think it's such a disservice to women's health that so many issues like acne or bad cramps, that the first line of treatment is hormonal birth control. One of my daughters was having some significant cramps every month, and she went to her doctor, and her first response was, well, I can put you on birth control. And then her next response was, well, I could give you like a antiemetic, which is like Zofran, or, to help if it can keep you from feeling sick. And so I have a book called The Period Repair Manual. And I'm like, just let me do a little research, and very quickly came upon some supplements that she could try, and it quickly improved her issues. So there are natural ways, and what I encourage people to do is, before you go the route of birth control, explore every other option, and seek out a doctor, a NAPRO doctor. There's also FEM. FEM has physicians that are trained to try to identify the root cause of your issues and give you a more holistic approach to treating it, versus artificial contraception, which is just a Band-Aid.
Yeah,
basically, it masks your signs and symptoms, and then when you come off of it, the problem potentially is still there.
Go for it.
Oh, you mentioned FEM. My wife's actually currently training through them to do NFP type stuff as well.
That's cool.
And she was she began down that path, and it's been a path of prayer and discernment for sure. But she began down that path because she's pregnant with our second, and going to doctors, and she's like, none of these people know anything about my body, and she's taken NFP courses kind of as a student in the past, and she has a pretty good working knowledge of the cycle and everything else. And she would talk to a doctor and be like, well, one example was, well, I'm fairly certain that I ovulated on this date, right? Because she was paying attention. And the doctor said, no, you didn't. No, you ovulated on this date. She's like, no, like, I know, right? And another one, and this is particularly scary, I think, more generally, right? Because I think one of the things about NFP is that it just practically, not even speaking morally necessarily, but practically, I think it gives women the ability to advocate for themselves, which unfortunately I've noticed you have to do. And, with your doctor. And so, in our case, my wife has low progesterone, right? Just kind of as a baseline. And that was caught, thankfully, during the last pregnancy. and she was with another group, and they prescribed her progesterone. Everything was fine, healthy baby. Um, this time around, she was like, "Hey, I'm concerned." Right? We had to switch over to a new group. She was like, "Hey, I'm concerned, low progesterone," and they were like, "Oh, we don't normally prescribe that." And she had to like go back and forth, like basically be like, "You're going to prescribe me progesterone because I know I have low progesterone." And what they told her was, "Well, we don't normally prescribe that unless you've had a few miscarriages." And she's like, "So you're telling me I have to lose children for you to give me the thing that I need to not lose my children?" And that's, I mean, again,
She said that to them?
I think she did. Yeah. She's been,
That's
I
awesome.
love her. She's been pretty fierce. And it's like, again, I'm not so worried for my wife because she knows her stuff and she advocates for herself very well. But I am worried for other women who don't know.
Right.
I mean, do you see that a lot, like with the couples you work with?
Oh, yes, definitely. I mean, I try to tell the women and couples I work with, you have to advocate for yourself, especially if you're with a physician who is very secularly trained. You have to very quickly judge if they're going to work with you, right? Or if they're going. Some doctors, unfortunately, won't prescribe certain medications until you have multiple miscarriages.
Yeah.
I know of a family member who had one miscarriage, and they knew of my situation. It wasn't one of my sisters, but after the miscarriage, we said, well, could they test you? Because there's a host of other blood clotting disorders other than factor V Leiden that sometimes can be treated with a baby aspirin or something simply. And her doctor's response at the time was, well, until you have 3 miscarriages, we don't test for anything
That's like
that.
saying until you have
insanity.
3 people fall off the cliff, we won't
Right.
install this guardrail.
It's the problem is a lack of respect for life. This is that we don't view life as a gift.
Yeah.
That our society sometimes views children as a burden instead of the beautiful gift that they are. And that, I guess that's all ties into my gift of your fertility. That each life is sacred, yours as well as any potential children you may have. And that we have to change that mentality, right, of how we view this aspect of our relationship, because our society has also made us believe that we should be able to have the pleasure of sex whenever we want to have that, whether we're married or not. And so we look at the pleasure as the most important aspect of our sexual relationships, whereas it's really the unitive and procreative nature of sexual intimacy that's most important, not the pleasure.
Right. Pleasure's
right?
meant to be a fruit of that bond,
Exactly.
not a motive,
Not a
like
right.
not the whole purpose.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah. So it's just we have this distorted view in our world of what the purpose and meaning of our sexuality is.
Yeah, I think Christopher West actually makes a really good clarifying point in his book Good News About Sex and Marriage, where he talks about artificial contraception. I think it's in there that he says the church is against artificial contraception not because it's artificial, but because it's contraceptive. I can explain that, but what do you make of that phrase?
Well, it's against life, right? Contraceptive is meaning that it's against life, and yeah, and the church is for life, right? That one of the first commandments God gave Adam and Eve was to go forth and multiply, right? In Genesis, I think it's chapter 1, verse 28. I'll quote that when I kind of give a small theology of the body presentation to some couples. We sometimes give presentations on that, and God viewed life as a gift, right? And we're supposed to be gift and give life to everyone around us in all that we do, right? Not just as bringing forth children. And so yes, I think that's why the church is against that, because it's anti-life. It's anti that potential of bringing forth life. As a homeschool, I'm a homeschooler, and I never mentioned that. I've homeschooled for 18 years.
It's awesome.
That is pretty amazing.
Yes, it's been such a blessing. Not, again, challenging at times,
Sure,
but definitely has really impacted our family and our faith journey as well. And so someone very wise early on told me that sometimes even when you're teaching adults, it's easier to bring it down to like the level of a child. So I will use a resource that's geared towards like 9 and 10-year-olds to teach, adults just about a very basic concept of the church's teaching on, marriage and how we're called to image the love of the Trinity and have a love that's faithful, fruitful, total, and free. So it's a very basic understanding, but I've had couples recently talk about, how nice it was to hear that from a medical professional, right? That our love is called to encompass all of these, to encompass the love of the Trinity in all that we do. So,
Yeah.
There's something that I've been pondering in my heart as you've spoken about all this, because, when we're trying to win back a culture and soften hearts, someone could view some of the things we're talking about with this mentality of being judged, because if I'm on contraception, or if I believe in contraception, or if I'm prescribing contraception, if a doctor even watched this one day, they might be like, well, this is how I was trained. This is what I know. This is how I was raised, right? This is what I've been told in a way that they told me this was healthy. And so there's so many layers that someone has to go through. And, I was I was talking to somebody one time about like archaeological evidence of different things, how the Grand Canyon was formed, how dinosaurs came to be, all those types of things. And I asked him, like, how he got, his information, research, like I want to know. And I was interested to just know the backstory. And that helped me understand a little bit more about how research is conducted and how research is shared in the future. And it's not nefarious in as far as the methodology, because it's more a scientific method that's just proven and good, as far as tactics and mechanics on how they communicate and how they function. And it all has to do with precedent, right? All has to do with scientific research precedent. So if like acclaimed doctors who were respected in society during this particular era said these things in such a way in their medical journals that were accepted at that time, then the next years afterward, it became more acceptable and more acceptable. And eventually there's a whole generation of people who never met any of those people, who weren't even alive during those times, but because they were accepted at that time, they just kind of accept that this is the research. So when a doctor is trained, they may never have been told any of these things, and they were told certain things that even made them like trained to completely move away from those conversations without being nefarious or with ill intent, but more just that they were taught a thought pattern that is nefarious in the sense of spiritually. We know Satan's ultimately the one concocting this, twisting these thoughts, right? But the people in some way are innocent. Like, how can we help someone who has lived in this whole paradigm shift enough where they can take those bold steps to think differently, to live differently, to reach out to different people?
And I think the question succinctly is, how do we help people to see their fertility as a gift, indeed, and not a burden?
Yeah.
That's a challenge, I think, for sure, for a lot of people, because it takes a shift in... Well, it will definitely take a shift in our culture, right? Because there are many people who are pro-life but see nothing wrong with artificial contraception.
It's ironic.
Because they don't have the complete truth, right? That we've lost a sense of what was God's plan. What was God's plan for us prior to the fall? and the goodness of that plan. I always try to frame it as an invitation. It's that even in the Catholic Church, it's not a subject that's often spoken about. There have been couples who have sought out counsel from priests who have been counseled incorrectly, in this area. And so that can lead to anger and hostility. And so I always, when I'm speaking of the church's teaching, is let this be an invitation so that you can start to see the goodness, truth, and beauty of what God desired for us and for our families and our marriages. And then I think I hope that maybe it plants a seed and that the Holy Spirit will work on that, and that over time maybe they will, their hearts will soften and they will maybe start to pursue more knowledge on why the church teaches what it does. I think it's really up to their receptiveness to God. And
I've been thinking a lot lately about how the demands of the gospel, right, the Christian life, authentically lived, in many ways, and this is scary, but it's true, are many ways incompatible with the way we currently have society, right? And this has kind of come to the fore for me. It was actually just I think this was yesterday. So my wife and I are currently discerning a move. So because we're in a condo, we have baby number 2 in the way, other factors, and of course I'm new to the whole housing market thing, so it's like, whoa, there's all this stuff going on, and numbers, and it's very complicated. And I found myself, not at all lamenting that I have children, because I've not met number 2 yet, but I mean, I love my daughter so much. But I found myself sometimes in this whole process being like, I wish I had more money. And I'm thinking it's probably a common thing people wish, right? But I'm like, I wish I had more money. I wish I were rich. And there's this issue with how we measure wealth, right? How does the Bible measure wealth in the positive sense, right? Because when the Bible speaks of wealthy people in terms of having monetary wealth, it's almost always negative, right? I mean, Jesus is very clear that it's almost impossible for a rich man to go to heaven, right? And we like to pretend like he didn't really mean what he said. And not to get down the rabbit hole of what does poverty mean and all that, but to the point, when the Bible speaks of wealth, children are always connected, right? What is that Psalm? Your children would be like an olive branch around your table, right?
Yeah, olive plants sitting around your table.
Yeah,
I've always thought that's a beautiful poetic, but funny if you actually try to illustrate that.
Yeah. But, so when my daughter was born, for whatever reason, I had stuck in my head the song, If I Were a Rich Man, from Fiddler on the Roof. Okay. I don't know why. I think it started as a meme, and then it actually got entrenched in my head as an earworm. And then I kept singing it over and over to her as a joke, and I bounce her and bitty bitty bum, and that's been, and literally she's a year old now and I still do it. And so it's become this thing. And of course the line, if I were a rich man all day long, I'd bitty bitty bum, right? This is going somewhere. So I'm sitting here having these thoughts about moving, and I wish I were rich. And this voice has gotten louder and louder in my head over the last week that says, Vincent, you are a rich man. And I was like, and I was pushing it away for several days. And then just yesterday, I chose to listen to it. And I was like, whoa, I am like one of the richest men I know.
Mm-hmm.
Not that I have a ton of money, because I don't,
Right.
but I'm one of the richest men I know. And then I bust out laughing driving in my car talking to the Lord, because I was like, that's why I bitty bitty bum all day long, because
You actually are.
I actually am.
Mm-hmm.
And
So
that
you
was
let
just
it
like
turn from a meme into a prayer.
yeah.
That's true.
I mean, well, and it's funny, like, you know, it's as if the Lord allowed me to get this stupid song stuck in my head a year ago, over a year ago, so that I could have this moment of realization of how blessed I am. And and that gift, right, has to do with my and my spouse's fertility. Because that's where, children are fruit of fertility. That's become very real for me, that realizing, oh, I'm so blessed, and my children are like chief among my blessings.
But you have to sit with that. You have to just sit with that. And it goes to your story as well, Angela. And I'd forgotten this, but I'm so happy you shared that, because it brought this back. It was almost like you were able to conceive easily when you first got married, and you had this faith journey that gave you an understanding of following the rules, listening to the church, and listening to the science and the medical things for practical purposes, but yet without the philosophical depth, the theological understanding, or even the emotional commitment to live it out, right? Like, you have to also have that encounter with Christ in a relational way that makes you say, yes, this is right because of that. And yet, while you didn't have that, or in your case, Vincent, while it was just a meme in your head, right, a goofy song, it's almost like the soil of receptivity was there enough for that when God planted the seed of truth in a relational way, in an emotional way even, you were able to tap into those experiences with this lifestyle already in place. And so for someone who's not even living that lifestyle, it might be harder for them to go down this road, right? And I get that. But it's almost like, blessed are those who have believed but not seen. There was this belief in you that was more for practical and mechanical reasons, right? But praise God, you had that just by pure obedience, even if it seems like blind faith, and some people think, well, you're just doing it because the church said so. Like, that's not healthy. Well, sometimes you just need to walk down the path because you're saying, well, this is obviously not working. This lifestyle, this contraceptive mentality is not getting me the life and love and happiness that I thought it was going to, that they keep promising me. So maybe I need to just have blind faith and follow obediently, even if I don't understand it, I don't get it. I still struggle to even agree with it. Because in my mind, the church is just this meme, this irrelevant, weird, outdated, archaic institution that has this goofy stuff that I've made jokes about my whole life. But maybe those things are actually the lifestyle I need to live, and I just need to go down this path until I figure it out.
We do have some goofy songs, though.
We definitely do.
I hope that they don't last much longer, but we do have some.
There is something to that. But I mean, can you speak to that, Angela, like that soil of receptivity that you can have just by being obedient and trusting the church's wisdom on this?
I don't know how qualified I am to speak to that so much, but just think it's being open to God, trusting Him. I really don't know. I haven't thought about it quite to that level.
I know. It is a deeper understanding.
Yeah.
Like, I never considered that we'd get to this point. It's like,
Right.
huh.
Yeah. No, I'm just thankful, just for my foundation. And then I'm thankful that I have a husband who we've walked our faith journey, together. We have our different things that speak to us as far as our prayer life, but we've been so blessed in our marriage, the graces of our sacrament. we can look back through the years and say, it was our sacramental graces that have pulled us through these times, and all I can really attribute it to is God, really, and at different seasons of life, having different opportunities present itself to us. I think a big turning point for us, other than the original event with Christopher West, was at some point in our journey, Father Martin Lineback was our pastor at St. James. We live in Elizabethtown. And my husband, at some point in conversation, asked him, "What's next?" And he said theology of the body. And he directed us to a family renewal project. And, digging into theology of the body has definitely, I think, also been the next step in that faith journey. So I just attribute it to God and just the people and the opportunities He's given us through the years. And then not turning, just that never being angry at God for me. I think if I had ever taken out my sorrow and my grief and turned away from God and away from going to church, and it probably would have turned out differently. So that firm foundation that my parents established, and my husband's parents, planted that firm foundation that, you go to church every week and your faith is an important part of your life. I think it's that good foundation, and then just God.
It sounds like a spirit of gratitude just came into this room as you spoke about all these people and these circumstances and God's grace. I think that's really it. Gratitude is that first step toward humility, toward trust, toward that obedient life that you're really hoping for. Just to start with gratitude wherever you are in that life. If we want people to really be open to life, you have to be grateful for your life, right? Before you can be grateful for the gift of life that God's going to give you and your children or your grandchildren. There's something to that. So thank you for that.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That's why we start with, like when we do our classroom ministry with FRP, we always start with your gift. It's always the starting point. I found that very few people believe that. Very few people believe it, and then all the fallout of it, right? Like, I don't know.
Yeah, when you don't believe in your own dignity, it's hard to move forward into trusting and believing in another person's dignity, right? And I think that's part of it. When you grow up in a family structure or lack thereof of abuse or violence or neglect or fear, shame in really, really negative ways, you can just absorb that as your worldview, and and truly believe that I am unlovable, and so anything becomes my greatest source of comfort. It's like the addictive mentality, and I think we have a whole culture of addicts addicted to something other than God and trust and belief and love. When we're as we're developing this content, like we're reaching 5th through 12th grade, like that's the hope of what we hope to share as far as sexual ethics and theology of the body applied kind of stuff. Like we really want to reach them in ways that are relevant to them, things that they really need, they're really interested in. And we know as they get older, they're going to want more specificity, more details, more mechanics, right, of things. But like, what would you say, like the youngest age that you should start? And what should you tell a kid? Like, how do parents give some kind of talk that guides them effectively, but that's also age appropriate and doesn't terrify a kid or scandalize them or make them feel like this topic's somehow awkward to talk about?
Right. So I was listening to a Jason Everett podcast several years ago, and he said, we go to school and we learn math 5 days a week for 12 years. And then we talk to our kids once about the birds and the bees and thinks that's enough. So I was like, that's a very good point, because it's a very complex, topic. I think, obviously, introducing the concepts of theology of the body about life as a gift, having awe for the creation around you and the people around you is so very important. And your child developing that knowledge that they're a gift and their life is a gift. As far as beginning these deeper conversations, I think 5th grade is a good place to start, especially with the technology that's out there. So many kids have cell phones or access to the internet, and even at Catholic schools, kids are talking about these things at a very young age. And so my husband and I, we want to be the first teachers of these things to our children. And sometimes it seems too early to start talking about these things in 5th grade, but so much of what I've done with our children, I look back to like what age I was when certain topics were introduced. And I clearly remember family life in 5th grade was where we were introduced to like just the biology of how babies are made and how our bodies work. And so I think that's important at that age, but then to bring in the church's view of human sexuality and its purpose is also so very important. There's a book that we use with our children. I believe it's called Wonderfully Made Babies, The How and Why. I can't think of the name. Wonderfully Made Babies is the beginning of it, but it's a Catholic book that blends, the biology of how a baby's made with theology of the body and the sacrament of marriage. And it's geared towards kids 9 and up. So
what's that name again?
the beginning of it is Wonderfully Made Babies, the how and why.
We can look it up.
Yeah,
Patrick, put that in the show notes as well.
Yes.
Catholic perspective on how and why God makes babies.
So wonderful resource. We were asked, my husband and I were asked to help give a presentation at St. James to the parents and students. And so in our research, we ran across this book. And so it was a resource that St. James gave to all the 5th and 6th grade parents for a number of years. And so we sat down with our children that were that age and would read it with them. And it can be uncomfortable.
Sure.
But my husband likes to say we need to get used to being uncomfortable and having some of these difficult conversations, because as our children get older, there are going to be many other more difficult topics that you may want to broach with them.
It's only going to get harder.
Exactly. And so if you can establish that line of communication and that they understand that, if I don't have the answer, if mom and dad doesn't have the answer, then we'll find someone that does, so that we can give you the correct information. We're not expected to have all the answers, but hopefully we would have resources that we could go to, a parish priest or some other parent that we trust that can help guide us on that. But I just think establishing that line of communication and not being afraid to talk about these things that are all over the media. And then reinforcing their goodness and then starting to talk about virtues like modesty and what's chastity. We need to be talking about the virtues.
Self-control and discipline, all of those things. Yeah.
Because so many people, I've had couples come to me that, we were taught you just wait till you're married. We're trying to be good Catholics. We're going to wait till we're married. And then we get married, and there are all these rules that go along with natural family planning because we can't use contraception, and it creates sometimes anger. And I think that it's just important that parents and the church starts talking about that there's much more than just abstaining. We need to develop these virtues, and that will aid us once we
Well, it's
transition into marriage.
it's recognizing that there are rules with every choice you make, every lifestyle you have, right? If you're an addict, the rules are you lie to people, you keep going after this thing over and over. I mean, there's all kinds of ways to say there are rules, and you have to follow them. And so you're living under some dictatorship, and it's not to say the church is somehow the dictator. No. The church is the only place that actually gives you true freedom by giving you the lifestyle God made you for. Right? These rules are the actual rules that you were designed for. Like your very heart, your mind, your soul, your body was literally made to live this way. It's the only way you actually flourish. And when you can paint it that way, it's like, oh, it's not, there's rules with everything. You got to get over that.
Right.
But if you can understand that, then you can move in that direction.
Right. And so other resources, I use this in homeschool, but parents could easily use this if they want to dig into more theology of the body. Rua Woods has some beautiful materials. I'm especially using them right now with my middle school age students. They have a middle school program that's beautiful, that we're talking exactly about that there's freedom within the guidelines, or I don't really even like to call the commandments or the church's, what the church teaches us as rules, or these are what you have to do. It gives us freedom when we aren't a slave to sin, right? And so we have to learn that there are boundaries, that God gives us boundaries to live in, but that's so that we can live more freely. And so the materials we're using right now is our 7th grade program, and it speaks to that beautifully. That as your parent, too, at times, I may give you boundaries that you don't like. I may give you a curfew that you have to be in at a certain time. But that's so that, you'll be safe, right? And that you can flourish. And that's what God wants for us, too.
It's awesome.
Well, I'm sure you're aware of this, but your daughter's been helping us a lot develop some of this actual content, and that's been a great gift. And we know that she's got a pretty solid foundation, it seems, from everything you've shared with us. Can you speak to how how your work has impacted your own daughters specifically in this?
So you're speaking about my daughter, Molly. She's going to be 20 years old tomorrow, so happy early birthday to Molly. But she's a sophomore at Bellarmine. And then my oldest daughter, Isabel, who's just recently got married. But they have been working with an organization called Natural Womanhood. And I learned about natural womanhood through my ministry, as I have been trying to help couples. Sometimes, there's a cost with natural family planning. And so some people don't have the finances to afford either instruction or the materials that they need. And several years back, Natural Womanhood had a scholarship program where they would, based off of a couple's financial needs, give them money towards instruction. And so, so just as I was becoming a natural family planning instructor, and it became a more common topic of conversation, right? What has mom been up to? And I wanted to share the truth and beauty with our children, and Isabel and Molly both, had interest in those conversations and have recognized the lie that the world tells us about contraception and sexuality. And Isabel had expressed at some point, I really wish I could become a Marquette Method instructor. But to be a Marquette Method instructor, you have to have a bachelor's degree of nursing. And so Isabel wasn't in nursing. And so when this opportunity presented itself, I sent it her way. But Natural Womanhood has cycle mindfulness clubs. So a young woman can be trained to start a group on her college campus, and they are just trying to educate women about the truth and goodness of the way they're made, right? And their cycles.
They have high school programs too, don't they?
They don't.
Oh, they
I
don't?
don't think so, no.
Okay.
Now, Isabel has, in E-Town, since Isabel's graduated, she started a club at Western Kentucky and ran a club at Western Kentucky University last year. Mm-hmm. And then Molly has started one at Bellarmine. And since Isabel is no longer in college, they've allowed her to have one in Elizabethtown. So she is working with young women in our parish, and she has recruited a few high schoolers. So with parents' permission, the high schoolers can come.
Gotcha.
So, but it's just that they definitely have a passion. They see the lies out there in our culture, and they, in their experience and conversations with other young women, there's so much misunderstanding. So many people just trust their doctor. And so if their doctor puts them on birth control for acne or cramps, they just go along with it. Or their mothers don't understand, some of the negative side effects of that. So, they've just jumped right in, and they want to empower young women as well with that knowledge, so that hopefully it'll have a trickle down effect and just continue to spread. Yeah.
It's a slow process. It takes a
is.
while.
But Natural Womanhood is a wonderful organization. If anybody has questions, they have so many articles. You could just go to their website on any number of topics.
Sounds like another thing for the show notes, Patrick.
Yes.
We're
And
giving
if there are
Patrick
any,
a lot of homework today.
if there are any, college age women out there, they're right now recruiting women. They want to expand it next year. They maybe have 18 or 20 campuses this year, and they want to have 30 next year. And so they're recruiting women who might want to start that at their college campus.
Now, do they count parishes as campus, like what Isabel's doing?
I can't remember if there are any other parishes or not that are involved in it. But if you feel like they are starting groups for married couples, that's the next thing on their agenda. I think a place where couples who are practicing natural family planning have a support. It can feel sometimes very isolating if you're the only one out of your family or friends who are practicing natural family planning, that people may not understand. Yeah. They may encourage you to go on birth control after you've had several children. So they see that that's the next need, is to provide support for couples who are trying to live that out.
That's awesome.
One of the things I think that is hard for people to get into, and I think because you can't attribute every single struggle in life to spiritual warfare. I'm learning that more and more every day, right? But yet at the same time, when it comes to this particular topic, there is definitely an element of nefarious spiritual forces attempting to keep the truth from being shared and told. And so we need to pray for the technology that will allow this podcast to air, for the people to really hear it, for it to reach people, right? Things like that, so that there is nothing that holds it back. But even the very speaking of contraception and shedding light on the lies, I think is critical, so that people can hear all they want about the goodness of NFP and the discipline and the virtue and all the openness and gratitude we're encouraging. But if they still believe that this particular method or this particular method of contraception is effective in doing what you keep saying is going to happen with NFP, and they think it's for good reasons, then they will still hold on to the thing that they're familiar with, that they understand, and that they've been told by their doctor works, especially if it has in their mind, right, because of their own use of it. What would be in your mind, and you don't have to go into the kind of detail like a doctor might, right? I get that, but of the most common methods of contraception for all people, not just teenagers, but all the way, that people are using, and why are they not effective or healthy? And can you speak to any of that, or do you get those types of questions in your classes?
Usually the people that come to my classes are either pursuing it because they don't want to use birth control,
sure,
or they're trying to follow the teachings of the Catholic Church, or it's required of them for marriage prep.
Right. It's usually the people that are required that you might get those questions from, right?
Or they just don't ask them and they move on after the class. So with all methods of artificial contraception, I think one of the things that a lot of people don't understand is that they don't always prevent conception. So with hormonal birth control, the goal may be to prevent ovulation from happening so that conception won't even take place. But oftentimes the woman still ovulates. And so she can conceive, but then there are second and third lines of defense with these hormonal contraceptions that then prevent that fertilized egg, this new life, from being able to successfully implant. So my husband, he's the pharmacist, could probably speak better to that. But so if it doesn't prevent ovulation, then it may make the lining of the uterus an inhospitable host to that new life, so that she just naturally, the woman just, her body naturally miscarriages.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of women don't know that. They don't know that they could be conceiving on a regular basis, but then their body just not allowing them to maintain the pregnancy.
Yeah. They could, yeah. I mean, they could be aborting their own children chemically, and
Without even realizing it.
yeah. I mean, and that's and I know some people push back and say that's not an abortion, but I don't know. Regardless of how we feel about things, like either life begins at conception or it doesn't, right? And to my mind, I think to the church's mind, like there's no other line that we could draw for the beginning of human life that's not totally arbitrary, other than conception. So, well, if we're intentionally, right? I mean, obviously, there's you don't know what you don't know, right? Culpability can be diminished by invincible ignorance, but that's like, so, I mean, thank you for saying that, because it's something that a lot of people don't know, and that yeah, how it's just all, it's like I found when we talk about contraception, when we talk about pornography, when we talk about whatever, like any of the big issues, cultural cancers, really, like I found that the further I dig into the topic, the more like sickening it gets. It's,
and the more convicted you are of what the church is teaching is right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
It's a hard thing to speak about, but people need to know,
Right.
like the importance of that knowledge.
How has natural family planning, your knowledge of it, your practice of it, helped you as a parent, of boys and girls, particularly, in teaching chastity? And we touched on that a little bit earlier, but like chastity, when most people hear that word, they immediately think like, no, right? Don't, bad, icky, hard rules. And not that there aren't obviously rules, but we know that it goes so much deeper than that. So how is like kind of this whole journey for you as a parent, as a professional, kind of influenced the way that you approach that topic, especially as the primary educator of your children?
So one thing that, as a homeschooling mom, it gives me so many opportunities to share, my faith journey and what I'm learning with my children, and on an age appropriate level. And so as I've grown in my understanding of natural family planning, both scientifically and, taking it, I like the expression, taking it from my head to my heart, right? The why are we asked to live out our sexuality in this way and in our marriages? When the opportunity presents itself, we'll have these discussions with our kids. And I guess I bring it down very basic. Adam and Eve, God asked them not to eat the apple, from the tree of, was it the fruit of the tree of good and evil, right?
Knowledge of good and evil.
Knowledge and good and evil. Okay. And so that apple is every choice that we make that could be a sin, right? God's asking us to choose him over ourselves, over our selfish wants and needs and desires. So I start that when they're young, just like when, if you want that cookie, even though mom told you you can't have it, are you going to sneak it and take it and choose yourself, or are you going to honor your mother and father like God asks of us, right? So it's that idea of when we're growing and we're learning about sexuality, or we're teaching our kids about sexuality, the world is sending us a message that you don't have to wait till you're married. That sex is fun and good, and you should be able to have it when you want it. But our understanding of what the church teaches us is that the marital embrace is a sign of the covenant of marriage. It's something very special that you save, because it's that sign that I'm committed to you, that I'm giving my total self to you. I saved that part of me just for you. And so we have to learn how to grow in the virtue of chastity, to live out our sexuality, according to our state in life. So, we just, try to talk to them when they start to get into their teen years about what does that mean to live out chastity. As a single person, that means, you don't partake, right, in sexual activity. But then when you're married, you practice out your sexuality in the way that you're called to. And sometimes that does mean abstaining, right? And sometimes that means that you can share in the marital embrace with your spouse. So it's just those, I don't know, just those frank, open conversations, and then being willing to field questions that they have. And so far, our children have been very receptive to that. I think it's just developing that trust and openness with them.
Mm.
You had comments on NFP kind of as an exercise in trust, particularly God's providence for your family. And what were those?
So I think the biggest thing that I've personally learned through the years of practicing natural family planning is that it does just require trusting God and the plan He has. Because when we have that false sense that we're in control, sometimes practicing natural family planning can become very stressful. I see it working with couples all the time, the stressor of, could there be this unplanned pregnancy? And so hindsight, is always, hindsight's 20/20, right? I wish I could tell my younger self, just trust, instead of worrying so much, like that something's not going to work out the way I want it, because of the times things happen that we weren't planning. They were wonderful blessings. Even the hard ones, like the loss of our babies, they had a vocation. The priest that said their graveside services, told us that those babies had a vocation. And I think that vocation was, to help us on that deepening faith journey, to lead us where we are, maybe to get us to heaven.
Yeah. Your story is so inspiring, and like somebody should just make a documentary about it. I mean, seriously, your family is just such a gift to the whole Archdiocese of Louisville in so many ways. And the great fruit from that suffering is profound. And I think of my own grandparents who had a very different outcome, but still somehow a mysterious journey of redemption that they experienced at the end of their life. But they also lost a child, like their first child, the day before their first wedding anniversary, and that just launched them on this massive journey of suffering. But yet, only after my daughter was born, and it was a little girl that they lost, and so my grandpa never had a biological daughter other than her, and my dad was able to, raise my sister, who's my half sister technically, but she's as full-blooded as you could experience, in that sense. But for me, and to hold my daughter was one of the most incredible gifts, because it was like this generational, journey. And then I found actual writings of my grandma talking about that difficult time in their lives only after my daughter was born, which I didn't even know existed. And she talked about that same reality of, they have an angel saint, not an angel, right? We don't become angels with cherub wings, but it's this idea of that saintly intercession that Jesus said we will be like the angels, but in our humanity, right? And so that intercession your children have had in heaven of your family. And honestly, by extension, all of the spiritual children you have that you're teaching, is profound, and is something to note, that when someone goes through suffering, if they don't know where to put that suffering, or they don't know how to trust in God and put those children where they really are, then they can feel like they're in a void, right? And it's so critical. So thank you for that.
Oh,
Like, truly,
you're welcome.
yeah.
Is the real struggle. I think, like I mentioned, we're discerning the move and everything, and I've been kind of faced in a very I don't know, obvious, kind of blunt way with my own attachments, right? I have this idea of what I think life should look like, what my life should look like, what my family's life should look like. And I've had to slowly come to the realization, and I almost certainly have not fully gotten there, but that like those attachments, they're not just trivial, I don't know, spiritual minutiae. They are actually preventing me from being the man, being the saint that the Lord is asking me to be, right? And so and like somehow, right, the things that the Lord gives us, even those things that we don't expect, we don't prefer, the things that wound us deeply, that He allows. I don't know. Somehow, like, how does one, like Job, say, the Lord gives and the Lord takes away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. I don't know.
Well, there's some mystery there, but some of that's solved through the cross, right? We think of Christ and the power of redemptive suffering.
Mm-hmm.
Like, how, when someone's lost a child, or is learning this truth and then has realized the damage they've either caused their body or the children they may have lost in the process that they don't even know. Like, how do you cope with that? But really, how do you enter into redemptive suffering in a way that, especially for someone who's never heard the phrase, like, we're not seeking out suffering. It's already happened to us. Like,
Right.
what do you do with it? Like, can you speak to that?
Right. It's funny. I've been taking to prayer some of similar ideas, the past 6 or 8 months, like the idea of praying for detachment from what I think my life should look like, or the way certain things should go, and learning to trust. And I guess, as a kid, I was always told, as far as suffering, just offer it up, right? Offer it up to God. And I think that's a good lesson, that those things, and this is something I use in my parenting, those daily little challenges that you face that might cause you suffering, you offer it up to God out of love for Him, right? So maybe you sacrifice for someone that you love. So on a child's level, that might be, I really want to play with that toy that my brother has, right? And I'm kind of angry about it that I don't have it. So I try to start teaching them, okay, but you love your brother, right? So let's let him play with the toy, and you don't go and hit him or take it from him, right? Out of love for your brother and your love for God. I think that translates as we get older, those sufferings that we have, that they don't always make sense. And most of the time, you'd rather not have to experience, right? The pain and the grief and the heartache and the worry that goes along with that. But then I look at Mary, and she was the perfect woman, and look at how she suffered, right?
Yeah.
She stood by Christ's cross, and she said, God, I trust in you. Mm-hmm. I think that's what we're called to in those hard times, is just, yeah, to just give it to Him. And you might not understand it, but you just have to trust.
In a weird way, that's the mercy of God in full action in a person's soul, like giving them the strength to offer their suffering up, but also trusting in His providence to love them, right, to forgive them, but also to uplift them so that they can move forward with confidence.
There's this fascinating I don't know, connection, I guess. I was so the parable of the sower and the seed, right? Very familiar. And I was praying with that last week. It was one of the daily readings. I think it was last week. And, again, very familiar story, right? The sower throws the seed and it falls on different places, and depending on where it falls, is how the plants grow. And something I had never noticed before was that when Jesus explains the parable to his apostles later, he says that the thorns, right, when the seed falls on the thorny ground and the thorns grow up and choke the plants, he says the thorns are the cares of the world. And I was, and of course, in the midst of the situation I've described and all my attachments that are kind of coming to the fore with that, I was like, oh, the thorns are, I'm being choked, right, by these thorns. But then I was like, what does the Lord do? He takes those thorns and pulls them off of my heart, right? And it's a heart surgery. It's painful. It hurts. And he allows them to be placed on his own head as a crown. And so this very thing that is the source of all of my grief and my shame, my sin, my selfishness, becomes a crown for the King of Kings. And that's to say that, we spent so much time here talking about NFP and contraception, and particularly some of the problems associated with contraception, medically, morally, all of that. And I just kind of want to make a note with that image in mind that, I don't know, anybody who feels condemned by anything that's been said, or what the church teaches, right? Who's been living a lifestyle that's contrary to the moral law, particularly in this way. Like the Lord's love is so much greater. Is so much greater than your sin. Like you have no idea, and so those very things that you've allowed to choke your heart out and keep you from, embracing his love, like he removes those if you let him.
Let him pull the thorns off.
Yeah. So, that's just something I think we all need to hear from time to time as well, because our sin can cause us to feel shame, which turns us from God, rather than contrition, which turns us to him. So God loves you.
Yeah. Angela, is there any other things that you have on your heart that you want to share about this topic? Because we've exhausted it to some extent, but there's always more. There's so much more. Like I was like, oh, we didn't go here, but I figured, as we're concluding our time, like, is there anything that is on your heart that you want to share with anyone that has heard this message, followed so far?
Well, following up on what Vincent said, it's never too late. If you have the majority of your married life contracepted. I had a woman reach out to me once in her early 40s. So, for the majority of her childbearing years, they had used contraception, and she had felt a pull for a variety of reasons, at 42, 43 to make a change in this area of their life. And that can be daunting and scary. Right. And I think that's the biggest thing that holds a lot of people back, is just fear of the unknown. But I know that personally, I would want to walk with you. That's what I tell people when they reach out to me. It's an honor to walk with you on this journey. And it's not my place to ever judge, or to look at you poorly for your life's choices, but to walk with you. And I think the majority of natural family planning instructors would feel the same way, and that I want to offer you the science and the medical knowledge that you need to do that. But if you ever, if anyone ever comes to me spiritually, with spiritual questions, then I'll offer what I can to love and support them, or to point them towards resources that could help them on their journey. So just to know that there is support out there. If someone feels like they need to make a change, but they don't really know where to start, that most natural family planning instructors want to help you find the right fit and help you on that journey.
So do you have classes that with lots of people all at once, or one-on-one, or is it both and? Like, how often do you open up classes?
So I offer a group class about every 6 weeks. So they're all Zoom or via online means. After COVID, most natural family planning instructors, I think, kind of switched to that online platform. It's much easier for people, especially if they have children and they don't have to arrange a babysitter. But I do offer to meet with people one-on-one if they would prefer a one-on-one class. And I'll even meet with people in person.
Awesome. Would you be able to send us dates of when you're beginning different classes, and we could also include those in the notes?
Yeah, my next class is on February 27th.
Awesome.
So my website is giftofyourfertility.com. So if you want to find out more, you can. And, if the Marquette method isn't for you, there are other methods out there.
Which one's the best? Is there that healthy rivalry, I guess?
I think there usually is. Yeah. It's funny, on NFP Facebook pages, you'll often see when Creighton and Marquette are playing basketball. Somebody will take a picture of it and post it, the Marquette-Creighton rivalry.
That's funny.
But
that's good.
Yeah, it's really what you want. We use the Billings method for the first, I don't know, almost 20 years of our marriage, until I became a Marquette method instructor. And so I can speak to the pros and cons of both.
Yeah.
I like the objectiveness of the Marquette method. I find using the hormones, it's much more objective than sometimes trying to decipher the physical signs. But yeah, no, there's something out there, and there's so many different things that can be used to aid a couple, in that journey.
Praise God. Praise God. Well, praise God for you, truly.
Thank you.
Thank you for being
Thanks
here.
so much for coming on.
Well, thank you
for having me. It's been such a
having
pleasure. That took a surprisingly intense turn there towards the end, but that's good. That's awesome.
Death and resurrection, right?
There you go. Yeah. No, praise the Lord. He's very good. Well, awesome. Anything else you want to plug before we wrap it up?
Nothing I can think of, no.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome.
God bless you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you again. All right. And thank all of you for sticking around. For Spirit Inspire, I'm Vincent Ricketts. God bless you.